These were the hands that shaped the world's imagination, the minds that turned canvas into history. Some died in glory, some in silence, but all left behind a final resting place that whispers their genius. Today, we uncover the graves where the legends of art sleep forever. Leonardo da Vinci. He was a man whose genius touched every corner of human imagination. In the quiet town of Amedeo, France, Leonardo da Vinci spent his final years at the Château du Clos Musée, sketching ideas that would never be completed. Age and paralysis slowly weakened him, and on May 2, 1519, the world lost one of its greatest visionaries. Today, his journey ends at the Chapel of Saint Hubert, a small Gothic sanctuary overlooking the Loire River. Visitors walk through its stone doorway to find Leonardo's tomb, a simple slab bearing his name. Yet even here, mystery follows him. His original grave was lost during wartime, and the remains moved later, leaving historians unsure if the bones truly belong to the master. His resting place, like his art, continues to inspire awe and curiosity. Vincent van Gogh. He was a soul who painted with emotion rather than brushstrokes, a man the world misunderstood until long after he was gone. In the quiet village of Auvers-sur-Oise, France, Vincent van Gogh spent his final weeks wandering through golden fields and sketching furiously, trying to outrun the storms inside his mind. On July 29, 1890, after a fatal gunshot wound, still debated as suicide or accident, he died in the small inn where he lived. Today, his grave rests on a gentle hillside in the Auvers Cemetery, beside his brother Theo, the one person who never stopped believing in him. Pablo Picasso. He lived a life as bold as the strokes he carved into the history of modern art. Pablo Picasso moved through eras the way others moved through rooms, effortlessly, rebelliously, leaving everything transformed behind him. In his later years, he sought peace in the south of France, far from the noise of fame. On April 8, 1973, at his home in Mougins, the world's most influential modern artist took his final breath. His resting place lies at the Château of Vauvenargues, a private estate protected by mountains and silence. Claude Monet. He was the poet of light, a man who chased mornings, seasons, and reflections until they bloomed into a new language of art. In the village of Giverny, surrounded by the gardens he created with his own hands, Claude Monet spent his final years painting water lilies that seemed to drift between reality and dream. By the time he passed away on December 6, 1926, age and cataracts had dimmed his vision, but not his devotion. Today, he rests in the local church cemetery of Giverny, a modest family grave marked with simplicity. Michelangelo. He was a titan of the Renaissance, a man who carved life from marble and painted the heavens across the Sistine Chapel. For Michelangelo, art was not just creation, it was a lifelong struggle with perfection, faith, and the limits of the human hand. In his final years, he lived in Rome, still sculpting, still sketching, refusing to slow down even in his late 80s. On February 18, 1564, he passed away quietly, leaving the world masterpieces that would outlive centuries. His body was taken to Florence, the city he loved most, and laid to rest in the Basilica of Santa Croce. Raphael. He was the gentle genius of the Renaissance, a painter whose grace and harmony seemed almost effortless, as if beauty itself had chosen him as his messenger. Raphael rose to fame young and never stopped rising, shaping the Vatican with frescoes that still glow with divine calm. But his brilliant life ended suddenly on April 6, 1920, his 37th birthday, after a brief and mysterious illness that shocked Rome. He was mourned like a prince of art. According to his wishes, Raphael was laid to rest in the Pantheon, one of the most sacred and ancient structures in the world. Rembrandt. He was a master of shadow and light, a man who captured the depth of human emotion on canvas like no other. Rembrandt van Rijn's life was a tapestry of brilliance and hardship, celebrated in Amsterdam, yet marked by personal loss, bankruptcy, and grief. Even so, he never stopped painting, etching, or exploring the human soul through his art. When he passed away on October 4, 1669, at the age of 63, the city he loved honored him quietly. Though the exact location of his grave within the Westerkerk remains unknown, historical records confirm he was buried there, among fellow citizens and admirers. Caravaggio. He was a revolutionary of light and shadow, a painter whose works throbbed with drama, passion, and raw humanity. Michelangelo Merisi, known as Caravaggio, lived as wildly as he painted, moving through Rome in a haze of fame, duels, and scandal. His final days were a desperate flight from the law, seeking refuge along the coast of southern Italy. On July 18, 1010, at Porto Ercole, he died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 38, leaving behind masterpieces that changed the Baroque world forever. Caravaggio was buried in the local cemetery of the town, a simple grave for a man whose life had been anything but simple. Paul Cézanne. He was the father of modern painting, a man who saw the world in shapes, colors, and shifting perspectives long before others did. Paul Cézanne spent his life in Aix-en-Provence, wandering the hills, painting Mont Sainte-Victoria and the orchards around him with a patience few could match. Despite struggles with health, loneliness, and a sometimes harsh reception from critics, he never wavered in his devotion to art. On October 22, 1906, Cézanne passed away in his hometown at the age of 67. He was laid to rest in the Saint-Pierre Cemetery in Aix-en-Provence, in a modest grave that mirrors the quiet dignity of his life. Gustav Klimt. He was a wanderer of color and spirit, a man who left Europe behind to find the raw, untimed beauty of the South Seas. Paul Gauguin's life was a search for freedom, painting Tahitian landscapes and portraits that shimmered with exotic light and emotion. Yet his final years were marked by illness, isolation, and longing for connection. On May 8, 1903, in the village of Hiwa-Oa, French Polynesia, Gauguin passed away quietly, far from the world he once knew. He was buried in the Calvary Cemetery of Hiwa-Oa, under the tropical sky he had so loved, alongside the serene hills and the ocean's distant roar.
Edvard Munch. He was a master of gold, ornament, and the sensual power of the human form, a painter whose work shimmered with life and desire. Gustav Klimt spent Vienna immersed in art, creating the iconic The Kiss, and a universe where beauty and eroticism danced together on canvas. In his later years, he continued to paint, lecture, and influence a generation of artists until illness struck. On February 6, 1918, Klimt passed away, leaving behind a legacy both controversial and timeless. He was laid to rest in the Heitzing Cemetery in Vienna, a quiet and shaded place far from the bustling city streets he had known so well. Francisco Goya. He was a man who wore his anguish on canvas, a painter whose works captured the raw edges of human emotion. Edvard Munch wandered the streets of Oslo and the fjords of Norway, exploring themes of love, death, and existential fear. His masterpiece, The Scream, immortalized the anxiety of the human soul, yet his own life was marked by loss, illness, and solitude. On January 23, 1944, at the age of 80, Munch passed away in Oslo, leaving behind a body of work that has haunted and inspired generations. He was laid to rest in Vor Freyler's Graveland, the city's main cemetery, among fellow artists and citizens. Jackson Pollock. He was a man who saw the darkness behind society's masks, a painter whose works captured both beauty and horror with unflinching honesty. Francisco Goya lived through war, illness, and political turmoil in Spain, creating masterpieces that ranged from royal portraits to haunting depictions of human suffering. In his later years, he went into voluntary exile in Bordeaux, France, seeking peace from a country that had grown dangerous for him. On April 16, 1828, Goya passed away at the age of 82. He was returned to Madrid and buried in the San Antonio de la Florida Chapel, a quiet place where the city honors one of its most daring and visionary artists. Andy Warhol. He was a storm on canvas, a man who poured his soul into every chaotic splash of paint. Jackson Pollock redefined art in the 20th century, turning the act of painting itself into a performance, a dance of raw emotion and energy. His life, however, was as turbulent as his work. Struggles with alcoholism, fame, and personal demons shadowed his genius. On August 11, 1956, at the age of 44, Pollock died in a car crash in New York, cutting short a life that was already a whirlwind. He was laid to rest in Green River Cemetery in Springs, Long Island, a place of quiet reflection amid the landscape that inspired him. Henri Matisse. He was the voice of a generation, a man who turned everyday objects into icons and celebrity into art. Andy Warhol lived in New York City, where he transformed silk screens, soup cans, and portraits into a mirror of modern culture, blending fame, commerce, and creativity like no one before him. Behind the glitter was a private man who navigated health struggles and the pressures of fame with quiet calculation. On February 22, 1987, at the age of 58, Warhol passed away after complications from surgery. He was laid to rest in St. John the Baptist Byzantine Catholic Cemetery in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, far from the spotlight he so brilliantly commanded. Joan Miró. He was a dreamer in color, a man who turned the subconscious into playful, surreal landscapes that seemed to float between reality and imagination. Joan Miró spent his life in Spain, experimenting with shapes, lines, and bold hues that defied convention and celebrated freedom. Even in his later years, he continued to paint, sculpt, and inspire, crafting a universe entirely his own. On December 25, 1983, Miró passed away at the age of 90, leaving behind a world that had been forever changed by his vision. He was laid to rest in Montjuïc Cemetery in Barcelona, a peaceful hillside resting place overlooking the city he loved. Pierre-Auguste Renoir. He was a dreamer in color, a man who turned the subconscious into playful, surreal landscapes that seemed to float between reality and imagination. Joan Miró spent his life in Spain, experimenting with shapes, lines, and bold hues that defied convention and celebrated freedom. Even in his later years, he continued to paint, sculpt, and inspire, crafting a universe entirely his own. On December 25, 1983, Miró passed away at the age of 90, leaving behind a world that had been forever changed by his vision. He was laid to rest in Montjuïc Cemetery in Barcelona, a peaceful hillside resting place overlooking the city he loved. Amedeo Modigliani. He was a poet of the human face, a man whose portraits captured not just appearances, but the silent stories behind each gaze. Amedeo Modigliani lived a life of intensity and struggle, moving through Paris's Montparnasse cafes, painting with passion even as illness and poverty shadowed his years. His elegant, elongated figures and soulful eyes reveal a sensitivity few could match. On January 23, 1920, at the age of 35, Modigliani succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving the world stunned by the brilliance of his short life. He was laid to rest in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was a voice of raw energy and rebellion, a young artist who turned the streets of New York into a canvas for social commentary, identity, and emotion. Basquiat's work exploded with color, symbolism, and fearless expression, reflecting the struggles and vibrancy of urban life. Despite his talent, his life was turbulent, marked by fame, addiction, and the pressure of the art world. On August 11, 1956, at the age of 44, Pollock died in a car crash in New York, cutting short a life that was already a whirlwind. He was laid to rest in Green River Cemetery in Springs, Long Island, a place of quiet reflection amid the landscape that inspired him.